Hi, everybody, and good Sunday morning to you here watching Tropical Storm Ian. I was just looking at the latest information coming in from the National Hurricane Center and from the hurricane hunters out there. What they're saying is, I'm just checking to be sure that I've got, there's nothing new here that I didn't know. Okay, let's go over what the new advisory is at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. And there you see, 50-mile-an-hour winds is the estimate, although the strongest winds were located up here well displaced from the center. But the thing that's happened with the system so far in the overnight hours and this morning is that we can clearly see that it's more circular. So it's showing an organizing process, even though it isn't strengthening yet. We are starting to see some curvature to these bands here, and all indications are that it will intensify. Exactly what the rate of intensification will be isn't exactly known, but the Hurricane Center is forecasting kind of significant and dramatic intensification beginning today and through the day tomorrow as it heads in the direction of Cuba. The pressure 1,001 millibars, which is kind of steady over the last several hours, so no big changes there. All right, so in terms of the track, here's the forecast for the next couple of days. You see the Hurricane Center is forecasting it to be a hurricane by tomorrow morning over these very, very warm waters here in the Northeast Caribbean, and the upper level conditions look essentially ideal through there. There's no reason atmospherically for it to not intensify. The only limiting factor would appear to be time. Some systems immediately come together. They just get a core developed in the system, and then it kind of blows up right away. And others take time to get that structure together, and exactly how long that is going to take is not known. There's no way to know that, but the Hurricane Center is thinking, okay, that's going to happen relatively quickly. The intensification will start quickly, and it will rapidly intensify once it gets a structure together that will allow that to happen. So calling for a Category 3 hurricane near the western tip of Cuba. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the computer models here, and the thing is that by the time it gets to Cuba, there is significant disagreement already in the computer models. Some take it to the left side of the cone, and some take it to the right side of the cone. Cuba, by the way, has put up a hurricane warning for the western tip of Cuba there. And where it goes here in the Caribbean makes a big difference what happens when it gets up here in the Gulf. So now let's look forward as we look up toward the time that affects Florida. So one of the changes at 11 o'clock, the 11 o'clock advisory, is that the Hurricane Center now has it at 130 miles per hour. It still may peak at 140. Remember, the 140 was the peak speed in the previous advisory. But remember this, that when we talk about intensity forecasts some days in advance, you always have to add 10 or 15 miles per hour, add or subtract, because we just don't have the ability to precisely forecast these things. So the idea is we're talking about a Category 4 hurricane. Think of a Category 4 hurricane. Don't get hung up on exactly the wind speeds. And then when we get up here into the northern Gulf, all indications are that the storm is going to weaken in terms of its top winds. But the indications are that it's going to grow in size. So what's going to happen is another dip in the jet stream is going to come along and put hostile upper level winds over top of the system. As we've seen, that weakens systems, keeps systems from intensifying and organizing and all of that. So, but when that happens, it also has the effect of making the system physically bigger. Well, why is that so important? Well, in the Gulf of Mexico, if you have a storm, let's put the storm right in the middle of this track, right here. So now the winds are coming around the system like this. Okay, so if it's a bigger storm, they're also coming around strong like this. And now that puts winds into Tampa Bay in a bigger way. So the idea that the storm is going to grow in size means that even with a track far offshore, there still will be a lot of water pushed up against the coast. As a matter of fact, even with the storm going right down the middle of the track, which takes it up right near Tallahassee, or over toward Monticello maybe, which is a little bit east of Tallahassee, even with the storm going on that track, the center of the storm on that track, the analysis that I've seen is that in Tampa Bay, the north end of Tampa Bay, old Tampa Bay especially, to some degree Hillsborough Bay, would still get a tremendous storm surge because of the way the geometry of the coast is and the way the water would be forecast to move around that storm. So I don't want anybody in the Tampa Bay area, even farther south, even Sarasota, and maybe even down to Fort Myers, to keep their eye off of this. Oh, thankfully, it looks like it's going offshore. So the first reason to not do that is even if it takes the track that they're saying, and even if it goes farther west, let's say it goes more toward Panama City, water rise will be significant according to everything we know in Tampa Bay. Obviously, the closer it gets, the worse it'll be. But that's the first thing. The other reason I don't want anybody to take their eye off this is very, very credible computer models continue to turn the storm, the worst of the storm, and before it weakens, as it would be expected to do as it gets up in here, before it weakens, turn it into the Florida Peninsula. So we're not ruling out that turn. We're not ruling out it staying to the right side of the cone at all. This is the European model here. This is the UK Met model. This one is called the COAMPS model, which has actually been quite accurate the last few years. On the left side of the cone, here we have the GFS models, the two green ones there, and two of the U.S. hurricane models that are designed to forecast hurricane, especially hurricane intensity. So all are credible models. And so what we have to look at here is a situation where we normally look at the consensus track, but we have to really think, okay, this cone really should be wider for this situation. The uncertainty is so high that it should be wider. Now, I want to add that your government is doing everything possible to figure this out and to narrow this down. And they deployed all their resources for this forecast right here, and the resources did not help the problem. So what this tells us is that it's like a knife's edge in the atmosphere. There's like a fork in the road, and it's just impossible to say, is it going to go that way or is it going to go that way? That's what this kind of situation tells us. So bottom line is we're status quo from yesterday, except for Southeast Florida. The indications are this is not going to have a significant, a big effect, a dramatic effect in Miami-Dade and Broward. If it were to take this right side of the cone, like the UK Met model says over here, then we would get significant fringe effects in Southeast Florida. It wouldn't be destructive effects, but they could be disruptive, could knock out power and so forth. So I want to say, don't get your supplies, don't be ready for the power to go out. All that can still happen. It's just less likely, obviously, in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. The further up your coast to get, the higher the likelihood of, or higher the possibility of something like that happen. So that's where we stand. We just don't have a more definitive answer for that. When we look at the computer-generated uncertainty, here's what we see. And it's a little bit misleading, honestly, and let me explain this. If you look at this, what you think you see is all kind of tracks here over Florida and fewer over here. Well, that's just because the European model makes more of these kind of uncertainty tracks than the American GFS model. Not quite double, but quite a bit more. So that accounts for this diversity. Basically, this is saying that a bunch of credible models say the storm's going to turn into the peninsula, and a bunch of them say it's going to go up toward the panhandle in terms of the center of the storm, still moving lots of water in the Gulf of Mexico, of course. And what this tells you is that the entire panhandle is still threatened from this. The entire panhandle and most of the peninsula, and by the way, the lower Keys. I don't want anybody in the lower Keys to think that there is not going to be some effect from this storm, because if we end up, as forecast, with a Category 4 hurricane out here, that's going to put at least tropical storm force winds, if not hurricane force gusts, in the lower Keys and on the southwest coast, Naples, Fort Myers, Venice, Sarasota, all the way up the coast. The farther north on the coast you get, seemingly the worse it is likely to be based on what we know right now. So here's the steering currents and that we're looking for. Now this is on Tuesday. So this is what the forecast is for Tuesday. So the idea is that this dip in the jet stream comes along, and that the question is, what does that do to the storm? And what you see is when we look at Tuesday morning, the GFS has the storm over here in the Yucatan Channel closer to Mexico, and the European has it over here closer to Havana, actually. And it's a big spread. So this is why the European model says, okay, the dip in the jet stream is going to grab it and it's going to turn it somewhere over Florida. Where the GFS model says, no, the dip in the jet stream is a little too far. It's going to just bend it a little bit, and then the dip will leave, and then maybe it goes back and it goes into the panhandle or something. So that's why we have this diversity, and it really comes out of what happens here in the Caribbean. So the odds favor that we're going to know what's going to happen, or better chance that we'll know what's going to happen while the storm is still in the Caribbean, as opposed to waiting till the last minute when it gets in the Gulf, based on everything we know right now. So that's where we stand. Let me take a look at some of your questions, and I'm going to do a few of your questions, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to keep you guys that are watching on Facebook. We're on two Facebook pages, my personal Facebook page, the Fox Weather Facebook page, and the Fox Weather YouTube channel. I'm going to let you guys stay on here while I do an update on Fox Weather. If you want to see the update on Fox Weather, you can download right now Fox Weather's app, and you'll see and click in the upper right, and you can follow the track, or on Roku, or on Amazon Fire, on YouTube TV, on your streaming platforms. And also on your iPad. If you want to look there, you can watch there as well. If you're in Tampa, on 13.3, I think is the channel, and in Orlando on 35.2 or 3, check out where Fox Weather is. If you're receiving off the air, you can get Fox Weather that way as well. So just a quick look here at who's tuned in. Obviously from Gainesville. There is still a reasonable possibility here of a significantly bad storm. You should have your hurricane supplies and be ready for the power to be out, which is going to be really the story for so many folks. So that's what we need to be ready for. Same thing Flagler County, same thing Treasure Coast. Not saying that you're going to get the worst of it, but the odds of getting disruptive, power knocking out weather from this storm is high enough that for me, I would be ready for the power to be out, and I would be ready with my supplies, that don't need to be refrigerated, and before the power goes out, I would use up any perishable food in my freezer and those sort of things. Lake Placid, same story. Lake Placid on the northwest side of Lake Okeechobee. If the storm does what the European model says it's going to do and turn into the state of Florida, you're going to be on the right side. You're going to get strong winds. You're going to have power outages. Those big trees there, limbs are going to come down. It's going to be a problem. So, keep that in mind. Homestead, I'm feeling pretty good about South Florida. We got to keep an eye on it, be sure the thing doesn't go way right or something. But it would be more, at worst, I think, what we got from Hurricane Irma 5 years ago, not some kind of direct hit, some kind of surprise thing like Hurricane Andrew or something like that. Montgomery, Alabama. Yes, Montgomery, Alabama, if the GFS model is right and this storm goes up into the panhandle, you're going to have a significant threat. So this, there's going to be some days and adventures. We're talking, Thursday-ish, so we have a lot of time to know that, but you are certainly in a reasonable threat zone. Tallahassee, of course, also in a potential high threat zone, with the idea, though, it could be anywhere. But everybody in Tallahassee needs to be in hurricane planning mode right now, having supplies for the power to be out, just like Hermine 6 years ago. Power was out for a long time in Tallahassee, if you recall. And so, just plan for that, and plan where everybody that lives in a place with a lot of trees, plan where you're going to park your car, that a tree is not going to fall on the car. And if you have a lot of rain, flooding rain, it's not going to flood the car. Make that plan. Do these things that you can do now. Cars can be moved easily. Houses can't be moved. So it's hard to stop a tree from falling on a house, but you can stop a tree from falling on a car. Just put the car in a good place. North Central Florida, what I said for Gainesville, all that applies. Okay, I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to put in my earphone for Fox Weather, and you guys just hang online, and I'll be with you very shortly. Okay, I'm putting up the sequence here for the Fox Weather hit. I'm still a couple of minutes away from that, so I can still talk to you online for just a moment. So Southwest Florida, Fort Myers and Naples. You're going to have effect from this at least along the coast. If the storm stays far offshore, you'll know there's a hurricane out there, but you'll be more a fringe effect. You still could have strong enough winds to knock down trees, knock out power, and so forth. And you will get water rise almost any imaginable path here. There will be water rise and potential flooding near coastal sections. You need to stay in close touch with Lee County and Collier County about that. But on as far as the direct hit, the question is the storm going to turn and take the right side of the cone or not? That is just unknown at this point, and it's discomforting, to say the least, that more than one very credible computer model continues to drive the hurricane in a very, very dangerous way into the west coast of Florida. Other models take it farther offshore and toward the panhandle, but that's why I don't want anybody hanging their hat on anything here. This is very much a wait and see what happens over the next 2 days in the Caribbean situation. That goes for Cape Coral. Samantha from Cape Coral. Michael from Greenville, South Carolina. So it's tough to say. If the storm makes this turn to the right, then Greenville is going to be pretty much out of it. If it does something more like directly down the middle of the cone, goes up into Georgia, then you might have effects. But the odds favor it making some kind of turn to the right, but we just can't say that 100% sure. If the dip in the jet stream doesn't grab the storm, then it will come farther north, and you may have effects as far north as Greenville, South Carolina. Todd, if you're listening to me, I'm ready with you here whenever you say. Talking to the producer at Fox Weather. So I'm here, so don't worry. I'm talking to the folks online who are watching us do this cut-in. Polk County here, Johnny says, looks like we dodged it. No, sir. You have not dodged anything yet. You may be right in the middle of it yet. Imagine the storm goes down the right side of the cone. Oh, Governor DeSantis is speaking right now, and they're carrying that on Fox Weather, so I can stay with you here online. Let me see if you guys... what the governor is saying is asking everybody to get prepared, essentially. Have your prescriptions. Just if there's a power outage, then drugstores don't work, ATMs don't work, Many gas stations don't work. So just be sure that you are ready and equipped for that possibility. Does anybody, let me see if anybody has any specific questions about what I said, because we have people watching from all over the place. North Carolina, it's just too early to say what the impacts will be in North Carolina. Odds are there will be some effect from this storm in North Carolina, but it is too early to say. So let's see, Jupiter. So again, if you look at the cone, then imagine the storm staying on the right side of the cone. The right side of the cone would put significant weather over Jupiter, and it would be disruptive weather, knock the power out. It would be windy, trees would come down. This is forecast to be a big and strong storm, and moving across the state will weaken it. But there's a whole long history of storms coming across the state. Those of us that were in Miami for Hurricane Wilma remember that Wilma came in from the Gulf, and it was tremendously disruptive all over the southeastern part of Florida. And remember, that was a Category 1 in Miami-Dade, a Category 2 in only parts of Broward and Palm Beach County, and it still was a nightmare. So don't anybody think that because you're on the East Coast and this is a Gulf storm that that's not a possibility if it takes that turn. If it takes that turn. Checking in from Winter Garden, I'm worried about my daughter who lives in Gainesville. Should I have her leave her apartment and come to my house? If she's in Gainesville at the University of Florida, they're going to take good care of her. We can't say at this point, honestly, whether the weather is likely to be worse in Winter Garden or in Gainesville, or bad in both places. I'm going to be very interested to see as we get to the first of the week what Florida State in Tallahassee and UF in Gainesville and other schools do with their students, and whether they recommend they go home or whether they recommend that they stay. And they have plans for them to stay at the universities and be safe. I don't have any doubt they would be safe, but trying to manage 30, 40, 50, 60,000 students is a daunting thing that they probably wouldn't want to do if they didn't have to after a storm, if the campus doesn't have power for a week or more. So you have to stay in close touch with what the university is saying and the forecast, and they may just close the university at some point and say, okay, go home if you want to, stay if you can't go home, or something. But let them make those decisions. I'm listening to the state emergency manager. Okay, what they're doing is saying that what I was talking about the storm surge in the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, including Tampa Bay, is that even if the storm weakens, the storm surge at the Gulf, at the coast, and in Tampa Bay, and in the waterways, and up the rivers, and all that is still expected to be significant and life-threatening, depending on the exact track. But most tracks still put life-threatening storm surge and flooding coastal sections, Pinellas County, St. Pete Beach, Remington Beach, all the places along the coast, and inside Tampa Bay, especially in the north end of Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay, and to some degree Hillsborough Bay. Also, Manatee County. All these places are subject to storm surge, even if the hurricane weakens by the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. Let me see. I would definitely, this is Rachel talking to a friend in Bradenton. I would definitely evacuate a mobile home in Bradenton, or pretty much anywhere on the West Coast. So let's let the authorities in all those counties make their recommendations, but the closer you are to the north, to the Tampa area and points north, you have to be thinking about the quality and the strength of your housing. And you also have to be thinking about your elevation. So anybody that's in low elevation, anybody in lower quality housing has to be thinking about evacuation, and maybe even as far south as Southwest Florida. Just again, whatever they say in your county, Collier, Lee, Charlotte, on up the coast, Manatee, Sarasota, listen to what they're saying, because they're not going to allow you to make a bad decision about where you are. Karen says, no, it was Diane that says European model is always the most accurate. Well, that's not true, actually. It used to be. We used to look at the European model first. But lately, the GFS model has been a little more accurate, but the European model has been very good at some time frames. And also, the European model is generally better about the weather pattern over the U.S. Than the GFS model is. So since this hurricane is being significantly affected by the weather pattern, this dip in the jet stream, that might balance things out. So it's really tough. It's just so. I'm going to wish that I wish we could pin this down. Todd at Fox Weather, if you can hear me, I'm monitoring you, so you can talk to me whenever you have information, and I can switch over to you. Let's see. So let me give you something to do, by the way, and you want to do this 2 or 3 days before the power might go out in your area. Is you get Ziploc bags, you fill them 3/4 full of water, and you jam your freezer with as many as you can fit in there. And if you leave food in there, don't leave anything that can spoil in there. And then also, and the reason you do that, by the way, is you want your freezer as full of ice as you can get, because that will keep your refrigerator cold longer if you don't open the door a lot. So, hopefully the power, hold on just a second, let me tell them. All right, I'm going. Hey, online guys, hang on. I'm going to switch over here. Todd, I'm here. Can you hear me? All right, I'm standing by to go on Fox Weather as soon as we can here. I hear you fine. Yeah, yep, I've been here all along. I've been waiting for you. I've been talking to you. Yeah, okay. All right, online, stand by. I'm going to do the Fox Weather update right now, and then I'll be back to you. So the governor is just talking about the things that we were talking about the issues of the various models and the possibilities of going into the Panhandle or going into the peninsula. Yeah, and the critical thing is to stay in really close touch with local authorities because their job is to keep people safe and to anticipate problems. This is a complicated scenario because the cone has moved and people tend to focus on the center of the cone, but in this case, the cone should be much, much wider because the uncertainty is so much wider. And what the governor was stressing there and what the Florida emergency manager was stressing, which was absolutely true, is that even if the storm weakens, and everybody's kind of focused on the weakening forecast later in the northern Gulf, still tremendous amounts of water will be spreading across the Gulf and flooding parts of Florida in a very dangerous way. So let's get into it here on the 11 o'clock advisory. 50-mile-an-hour winds moving west-northwest at 14, and there was the pressure. So what we're seeing is just this slight beginning of what we think will be a move in the general northwesterly direction. We're also seeing here, notice, thunderstorms developing around what appears to be the center. The strongest winds have actually been well displaced way up here, according to the hurricane hunters, but now we're starting to see the signs that we expect to see in a developing storm that has the potential to continue to develop here throughout the day. So here's the cone, and you notice the weakening that I mentioned that is forecast. So the idea is to have a Category 4 hurricane somewhere here in the Gulf. Now, in actual fact, this kind of bifurcation of the models happens way down here in the Caribbean. Which side of the cone do they take? It was yesterday that they were fairly unified until they got to the Gulf. Now they kind of branch out here in the Caribbean, and it really has to do with that dip in the jet stream coming along and how it grabs it. If it takes it like that, we have a major hurricane disaster in a good part of Florida. If it goes more up this way, I'm not saying this wouldn't be a disaster in the Panhandle of Florida and up into Alabama and Georgia, and also even if it goes up toward Tallahassee, extremely high and dangerous and life-threatening water would come into Tampa Bay and along the west coast of Florida. So that's what they were stressing in Tallahassee at the news conference that was just on Fox Weather that you heard. And by the way, we're simulcasting right now on a couple of Facebook pages, on the Fox Weather Facebook page, on my Facebook page, and on Fox Weather YouTube. And over there, you can ask questions. If you want to send me questions, you can do that, and I'll go back over there as soon as we're off here. So I just wanted to show you this. If the storm were to take the exact National Hurricane Center track, we would still have tropical storm force winds with possible hurricane force gusts, even in Key West and Fort Myers, with this super strong storm just kind of well offshore. So this is a big hurricane. It will occupy a lot of space. It will cause effects over a very large area. So do not concentrate on the center track. That was what I wanted to show you there. And then here we see this uncertainty graphic, and this was never come into better play than now. You see so many possible tracks over the state of Florida in that very threatening way. other possible tracks up into the Panhandle. This entire region is in a high threat zone, and don't let anybody tell you differently, unfortunately. Although we do have some days, a couple days, to really kind of resolve this. All right, guys, back to you. See you back at the top of the hour. Okay, to my online. All good, Todd. Thank you. Okay, let me get back to what we were talking about here online, and let me see. So I was saying, let me get back to that important point. Okay, what can you be doing now? There's no reason not to do it now. Is to put water in Ziploc bags, about three quarters full, seal the bags, jam them into your freezer. So fill that freezer with those Ziploc bags. And that has two really important effects. One is that when they freeze, after they freeze, and if you lose power, that will keep your refrigerator cold for a significant amount of time longer. The second is that if you're out without power for a long time, long enough for them to melt, you have bags full of fresh water, and you might need water. And this cuts down on the amount of water that you have to, have either buy at the store or have in a jug or some other way to get the water. So that takes days for all those to freeze. So there is no reason for you to not do that today. And then you have the other general, one more thing about the freezer, by the way, is if you take a glass of water, a small glass of water, and you put it in the freezer and freeze it so that, you have a block of ice there in the freezer. Then after it's frozen, put a quarter on the top of the block of ice, and that will tell you, you just look at that thing and see if the quarter has fallen into the water. Then you'll know. You don't have to hunt around and see how things are. If it's fallen in there, any food in the freezer is no good. If it's still up at the top, your food is probably good in the freezer. So two things you can do to help your refrigerator right now. Do not change the temperature. Don't turn it all the way down to cold or something like that. You can actually do damage to your refrigerator doing that. That was an old kind of wives' tale thing that they used to talk about. The main thing is to keep your freezer as cold as you can. The other issues, of course, of what you should be doing now have to do with prescription drugs, with money, being sure you have enough cash, the idea of if the power going out, not having ATMs, and not having gas stations. In much of Florida, gas stations are not on generators. That's less true in South Florida than other places, but lots of people are living in areas where if the power goes out, you can't get gas, and gas is going to be at a premium anyway because a lot of people go up and fill up with gas, which they should. Other people are evacuating, and they're going to be using gas up on the turnpike and using more gas than normal and so forth. So, protecting your gas, filling up when you can, as soon as you can, trying to stay relatively topped out until authorities say, please don't do that, which they might very well if there's a shortage of gasoline. Let me see. Clearwater, yes, Clearwater is watching, Tampa's watching, Punta Gorda is watching. You should all watch very, very closely. I mean, I can't reiterate enough that this right side, if all of these models have any idea of being right, that this is terribly threatening for not just the west coast of Florida, but central Florida and the Space Coast of Florida and even to the Treasure Coast of Florida and the First Coast and all that area and the potentially the Nature Coast, just depending on where it turns, if any of these are right. Now, what's happening is the government is going out with special aircraft to monitor all around the plane, all around the storm, and they're measuring, making extra measurements across the U.S. to try and get a grip on why we have all these very credible forecasts that are so potentially damaging to the state of Florida going that way, and we have credible forecasts that are coming up this way, and then this consensus, which is more or less an average, is in the center, and that's what the consensus is. Now, normally, the consensus is the best one, but in this case, you have such diversity and diversion in the two credible models that taking an average, it may not be like a fork in the road where you can't take the average, right? The average of a fork in the road is smashing into the pylon that divides the fork. So it might be a one or the other thing. We just don't know. This is a speculation for sure. All right, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to sign off right now, and unless something happens, I won't be back until after the 5 o'clock advisory, and we'll do a similar thing here, a full update. I'll be looking over your questions, and just to be sure there's something that, if I'm missing something, that I'll be sure and cover that. All right, I don't see anything right off, but I have so many questions here. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, guys, stay with me. I'll give you a little update on Facebook and let you know for sure, but plan on 5 o'clock. After the 5 o'clock advisory, we'll do a new full update here and answer your questions as much as possible. All right, we'll see you then.